Hi, I thought it might be useful for you to see a second video. This one, I'm going to be talking just to go through the first class about JavaScript and the first section about getting started with a programming language. I thought it might be useful for you to see roughly what I'm talking about and me to maybe demonstrate some of the things as we go over them. So if you've got this far in the class, you'll know that we're looking at JavaScript, which is a programming or rather scripting language, and it's a language which is executed directly in the browser, not on a server. We can do a little demonstration very quickly directly in the browser, so you can see that you can actually write JavaScript straight into your browser and it will give you a response, like an answer. It's obviously not the best way to write it, but it's just a quick little test to show you that really things are being executed and calculated right there in front of you. So if you open the inspector by right-clicking on any page and hitting inspect, and then you select the tab on the top console, you can, in the console here, which is like where the little arrow is, you can literally write in JavaScript and hit enter, and it will execute it, and it will give you, as a response, immediately the value of the answer. So we can do very simple things like maths. We can do 4 plus 3 and hit enter, we'll get the answer, which is 7, because in JavaScript we can do mathematical operations very simply in JavaScript by simply writing in numbers and operating symbols like plus or times, for example, using the asterisk, which gives us 12, or writing in negations, because it's minus 19, or writing in division, so 1 divided by 4, for example, which is 0.25. The first thing we looked at in our this first section is variables. So basically the idea is just to demonstrate how really here JavaScript is kind of working in the same way as algebra would have done, in that you have letters or words, in this case keywords, which represent either numbers or all other kinds of data. So it could be text strings, it could be a list of things like an array, it could be an object, but any kind of data can be represented simply in a keyword variable. And in JavaScript we use this word var, V-A-R, before the declaration of a variable for the first time to indicate that we're declaring a variable. But some other languages don't have this feature. Even some of the new versions of JavaScript have modified the feature slightly. But I've included it here because it's in JavaScript as default. If you look at PHP, which you'll be seeing with the other teacher on this course, for example, PHP doesn't have this var. It uses instead a symbol like a dollar symbol, which indicates that something is a variable. So if I just take this, for example, this text that I put here, and I show you in Sublime Text, and I put in my script tags, this text that we put in, so I'm setting foo to 12, bar to 9, and then result to foo plus bar, and then I'm doing a log of the result. And you should see that as I refresh the page in JavaScript exercise, the first thing that happens is that this result is simply echoed into my console because of that line that I added here, console.log. Console.log is really useful because it can help you log different results. And it can also help you debug things, decide like if something's working properly, or to see what variable carries what value at a certain time in your code. You can just stick in a console.log line. It has no effect on the rest of the code. It would literally just output the value of whatever it is to the console. So for example, we could also console.log foo here, and just have a think, what do you think it's going to come out if I do console.log here of foo? What will happen when I refresh the page? And you should, I guess, get a 12, because as you saw in the code, foo equals 12. We set foo to be equal to 12. So this is saying let foo equal 12, bar equals 9. Do this addition here, but then we're actually logging to the console foo. We're not logging the result. And similarly, if I put bar, I would get 9 out in the console. So that's the idea of setting variables. It's fairly straightforward. It allows you to use keywords to represent numbers. It also allows you to use keywords to represent strings of text, for example. So if I remove this section with the mathematical equation, because that won't make much sense to text, and I say let foo equal, this is foo. If I now do a console.log, in the console I'll see the text echoed out, this is foo. Notice how I had to put these quote marks around it, and if I remove the quotes, JavaScript will throw me an error here, and you'll be able to see the error come up in the console because it doesn't interpret this as text unless you put the quote marks around it. It can be single or double quotes. There's not really any difference in JavaScript. In some languages there is. But in every case you need to put that, because if I just refresh here, the first thing it's going to throw me is a syntax error. There's an unexpected element in my syntax, which is basically that it thinks I'm listing variables and it doesn't understand what I'm trying to do. So we need to put some kind of quotes around it, and then you get the text to come out. So we also talked a little bit about functions. Functions are basically lists of instructions. The first function I wrote, this function here, annoying alert. You'll see that this is really annoying. You'll see that in JavaScript you can use this little method here called alert, which just pops up on those stupid annoying little alert boxes that you've probably already seen on the internet. And whatever you put inside the parameter will be the text. So to start with, this function is just open annoying alert. Everything inside these curly brackets here is what's going to be executed when I run this function. And what's executed here, well, the first line is it's going to log to the console, I will now open an annoying alert, so it's going to log that text to the console. And then the second line, so the second thing it's going to do is it's going to pop up a silly alert in the browser. And if I refresh the page, you can see the first thing that happens is if you look at the console here, it now says I will open an annoying alert, and I got this wonderful irritating alert that popped up here. If we remove this line here, so open annoying alert, we define the function, but we don't call it, nothing happens. Because you can define a function, and so now JavaScript knows that this function exists, open annoying alert, but it won't actually execute those instructions until you call it by writing it in the script like this. It can be inside another function, it could be anywhere, but if you don't write it out, then it won't actually happen. We can even call it from the console, and you see it's actually auto-predicting that, because it knows the names of the functions that have been declared. So I just run it like that with an enter, and I get an alert that pops up. The next thing to look at is this second example, where I used a parameter in my function, and I changed it. So parameters go here, and the key thing to remember really with parameters is that when you define your function with the keyword function, you pick your parameter names. So this parameter is called alert text, and whatever you put here, every time you use it within the function, it will refer back to whatever value was passed through the function. So this is like a variable, but it's just scoped to within the function, basically. It's called a parameter. So in this case, whatever we pass into the parentheses, the brackets after our function, it will take, first of all, it will echo, I will now open an annoying alert to the console, and then it will open an alert with that text inside. So the first time around, this alert is really annoying, and the second time around, this one is too. So this alert is really annoying. Notice console.log is now I will open an annoying alert, that's what we told it to. And the second thing is, again, that's not changed, but this has, because I changed in my function. This text is fixed, it's always going to be the same every time the function is called, but this one changes depending on what you pass in. Okay? We can even process these inputs. You can pass multiple inputs. You simply add a comma and then write your second input name. So alert, second alert. Okay, and then we do alert text, and then we do second alert text, and so we call it twice. We get rid of that console.log, and then here I now need to pass two parameters to the alert text. Actually, I'll just get rid of the second function because we don't need to call it twice. And what will happen is now, because I have now two lines which both say alert in it, first time it's calling alert text, second it's calling the same function on second alert text. What we should have is an alert that says this alert is really annoying, and then another one saying second. Let me refresh the page. So this is really annoying, and then another one that says second. And that was with one function, but using two parameters. Regardless if I change the order of these elements, it'll always be the same because it's basically just matching the keyword here to the keyword that's passed in the parameter. Okay. Now just to quickly look at the types of variables that we can have. In most programming languages we have specific types of variables, so we put the text we put inside, for example, inside these parameters was encapsulated with quotes. And quote marks indicate to us that to the program that the variable is a string. So anything that we put within quotes, even if it looks like it could be something else, will be interpreted as a string. If I write, for example, we saw that further down I showed you that arrays look like this, so they look like square brackets with values separated by commas inside, etc. So this is an array, but if I wrap it in quotes, now, as you can see, my syntax highlighter has highlighted the entire thing in green because it's considering the entire thing to be a string. And so if I do a type of on this, it will come up with a, it will tell me that it's a, it's a string, even though it's obviously in the format of an array. Let me just get rid of this, turn off this for a second. You should see that it's telling me that it's a string. Okay, if I'd removed the nice quotes, it now tells me that it's an object because because JavaScript doesn't define array as a separate type as an object, so it's still an object. What I would say is some really important things to understand are the difference between a string and an integer and a float. So in JavaScript, for example, we need to, if we have an integer as, and then we try and do, well, let's go back to doing what we were doing before, so foo and bar, right? So we have foo is 4, bar is 9, and then we try and do result equals foo plus bar. So what we should see, obviously, is 4 plus 9, which is 13. And I'm going to console log the result. So I've console log the result. So as I said, obviously I'm going to get 13. But an interesting, slightly strange, complicated thing to understand in JavaScript is that if we wrap these in quotes here, now it's going to understand it as a string of text. So what happens? It's not a number. It doesn't understand it. It doesn't interpret it as a number or an integer anymore. It now interprets it as a string, like a string of characters. So what's it going to do? Well, one of the strange things in JavaScript is that this operator here, the plus, also can squash two strings together. So if you have the string 4 and string 9 and you do 4 plus 9 and they're type string, not type integer, it won't give you 13. It will give you the string 49, which obviously looks like 49, but is a type of a string. So as you can see now, it's telling me it's 49. Now, it's not because it's done a mathematical error, it's because it's taken literally the character 4 and stuck it to the character 9, because we told them it was a string, not numbers, and in that case it's given us 49, or 49 as a string. There are lots of other types of variable in JavaScript. There's the Boolean, which is quite important to understand, which is basically just true or false. It's a Boolean just means it's a variable that can only be true or false. And when we write it, we can't do obviously mathematical operations with it, but when we write it in JavaScript, just remember that it doesn't have the quotes around it. So if we want foo to equal true, then we don't put the quotes around it. If we put the quotes around it, it's going to interpret it as a variable, as a string variable, not as a Boolean variable. Okay. If we look, the last thing to look at then in this part of the class, which is probably a little bit difficult for those of you who have not done programming languages before, is these control structures. One of the first one is if. If is obviously a very straightforward control structure. It basically takes a condition here, so ignore the fact that it's in a function for the moment, it's just in a function because it's neater, but it takes a condition here, and as long as that condition is true, it will do the first option, and if not, it'll do whatever you put under else. So if number is greater than 10, for example, it'll do the first option, else it'll do the second option, this number is smaller or equal to 10. But you can put other conditions in here as well. So one of the things you could put in here, for example, is a boolean. So if we set a boolean and say test equals true, we put true inside here, we put test inside here, whatever this test is, and what's basically going to happen is if test is true, and obviously test is true because we set its value to true, it's going to give you the first hit. So what will happen in this case is every single time we run this function, it will give us the first hit. It won't ever show us the second hit, the second part under else. This is particularly useful in JavaScript and stuff, not to do it just set to true obviously, but to use these kind of variables because, for example, in jQuery, this won't work because I don't have jQuery. Oh, I do have jQuery included. Is that you can use this? You can say, for example, does my div has class test, and if the div has the class test, this will be true, and if it doesn't have the class test, it will come back false. So you can simply whack that inside your condition, and if your div has the class test, then it will be true, and it'll use the first result here, and if the div has the doesn't have the class test, it will use the second result here. So if-else statements like this, and the other thing to remember is you don't actually need an else. You always need the if part, but you don't need the else part. So you can exclude that. You can just leave that off if you don't want the program. If you want the program to just not do anything if the condition is not met. So if my div has the class test, then turn the text blue. Else do nothing. You can just remove the else part like that and leave that off. Last thing to look at then, which is a feature of most programming languages, are these wonderful for loops. A for loop is a loop that basically allows you to repeat an action multiple times. So for this one, which we use as the example, as I explained in the class, the first part of the for always has these three different parts in its conditions, and almost always the first part and the last part are the same. Not always, but almost always, the first and the last are the same. So you set the counter to 0. The second part, the last part is the I++, which is always the same pretty much, and it will always increment the counter by 1. So the first time the loop goes around, the counter is 0, the next time it's 1, the next time it's 2, the next time it's 3, the next time it's 4, and then it stops because when it hits 5, it doesn't fulfill the condition anymore. And so that's the important part of this condition here, is that the loop will continue to run until this condition is no longer true. So I is less than 5. Obviously, this is going to run 5 times because it starts at 0, which is the convention. So I'm printing a console, you can see it says 5 next to it, that means it's happened 5 times. But if I put it the other way around, so I is greater than 5, I starts at 0, I does plus plus, so it increases itself by 1 at the end of the loop, and the condition is I is greater than 5. This will run 0 times because I is never greater than 5 because it starts at 0, and then the loop doesn't run the first time around. So you'll see that nothing happens. So that's something to think about in your conditions. Okay. The last thing which can also be useful for looping through elements in JavaScript is that you can actually use the value of I in your you can actually use the value of I in your inside the loop. So here the variable I is going to have the first time the loop runs the value of 0, then the next time it runs the value of 1, then the next time it runs the value of 2, then the next time it runs the value of 3, and so this will log to the console I is currently 1, I is currently 2, I is currently 3, I is currently 4, and so on up to the 5 times. Okay. This can be useful because We didn't really look in detail at arrays, but an array of elements, it can be useful to look at first the element number 1, then element number 2, then element number 3, then element number 4, and to call them each in your for loop. And we might see that a bit later on in the class. Okay, so I think that's pretty much it for the moment for those few basic things. I hope that the video makes a little bit more sense maybe than the text does, and that way you can understand a little bit more when we come on into the second part of the class, which will be understanding and using jQuery to select elements and make changes in your document and to add some interaction to your document. As before, please let me know if it was helpful or not, and good luck with the rest of the class.